So after my last jewelry video, you guys kept asking me for a Cammy model. So here it is. Cammy sculpted by ES Monster. This model was given to me for free by ES Monster. They specialize in female models, so if you guys like female figures from video games, comic books, and anime, go check them out if you like their artistic take on these characters. As usual, I start by sanding all the parts with a 400 grit sandpaper. I'm starting to add magnets to all of my models because it's just so much easier if I want to ship them out without damaging them. Adding magnets is actually pretty easy. I just use some crazy glue, put them around the holes, and then just shove the magnets in. One thing you do have to be careful though is when you're putting on the magnets for the opposite end, for them to connect, you need to put the opposite side of the magnet. Because I print my models hollow, I use milliput to fill in all those holes. For the small imperfections, I like mixing IPA with milliput and use an old brush to fix all the little support marks or little divots that you get from 3D printing. The last step is to use some sandpapers again to smooth out all the little fixes that I made on the milliput and all the remaining areas that I wanted to be super smooth. With that, she's ready for a coat of black primer. And let's paint. As usual, I use a pink as a base tone to be the foundation of the skin tone. Previously in my jewelry video, I brushed on a very thin down red all over her body. But this time with Cammy, I wanted to try a different style and spray the red with my airbrush on specific areas like the elbows, the knees, the feet, and especially the face. I find adding red makes the overall skin tone more interesting to look at, especially on a model showing so much skin. Now that the basic foundation is done, it's time to go to the next step and use medium flesh from Vallejo. The basic idea is to just spray it thin enough so that we can still see the foundation work that we did in the previous step. For the first highlight color, I'm going to use the same medium flesh and mixed in with some fairy flesh to create the highlight color I want. The best way to paint highlights in my opinion is to have the model assembled so all the highlights are placed in the correct position. And this is where the magnets come in handy. With the magnets, I can just temporarily assemble it and spray the highlight at an angle with my airbrush. For the final step of her skin tone, the last color I'll be using is highlight skin. For this, you really want to properly thin down the color and spray the highest points of the model at an angle. Areas such as the forehead, the top of the shoulders, and any area you want to emphasize. With that, the skin tone is finished, and I always use a matte varnish to protect the skin tone before I continue painting the model. While she dries, let's start working on the base. Her base is actually very simple, so I wanted to make it more interesting by adding some real sand to it, but I had this image of her walking into water. So if you want to see how I did it, make sure to stay till the end. While the glue dries on the base, time to get back to Cammy. I'm always looking for ways to improve my painting. So now I've been trying this new method. Instead using black, I use this reddish flesh color as a base. The reasoning behind it is because I want to leave the corners red while painting the white of the eye. Not only that, I also mix some flesh tone with the white to give the eye some shadow. This makes the eye feel not as flat and give it some shape. What do you guys think? Do you like how the eye turned out? The last step would be adding some gloss varnish to the eye. As for her hair, my initial plan was to use the contrast paint Imperial Yellow from Games Workshop, but it turned out too orange, so I went over it with a much lighter yellow to create her blonde hair. Normally, this is the part where I start assembling the model before the big reveal, but remember the part where I said I want her to be walking into water? So we're not quite done yet. But before that, I want to thank all my new Patreon supporters. We got Barry, Felipe Silva, Kilroar was in here, Danny Kusasi, Diotis, Panaflora, and last but not least, my first YouTube member, Kenny Justice. Thank you all so much for the support, and now, let's do that water effect. My plan was to do a resin pour to about the height of her feet. This was my first time working with a deep pour resin, and I was really afraid of messing it up. I didn't want the resin to seep into the base, so I'm using the same wood glue to prevent that from happening. Now to prepare the resin itself. It wouldn't look like the ocean if I just left it clear, so I'm using some resin dye to slowly tint the resin. Just make sure you add the dye incrementally so that you don't overdo the blue, because once you pour it in, there's no going back. Once the resin is poured, the only thing left to do is to wait and hope that I didn't mess this up. So 3 days later, I came to check on the resin pour and it seemed to have worked pretty well. Even though there's still some bubbles, but I think for a water effect, the bubble is fine. It actually looks pretty good. All that's left is for me to add some UV resin on top so that the water doesn't stay flat and actually give it some wavy effect. If you've enjoyed my video so far, consider subscribing to my channel, or maybe even joining my Patreon. See you in the next one, guys.